The judge laughed before I even sat down. It wasn't loud, just a small, smug chuckle that bounced off the wooden panels of the courtroom, but it was enough to remind me I wasn't welcome there. My father stood beside his lawyer, straight-backed and proud, like a man who'd already won. It was 9:12 a.m. on a gray Tuesday, the kind of morning where the air smells like damp paper and cold coffee. The courtroom lights flickered once, humming softly above us, and I remember thinking how strange it was that justice could live in a place so dim. Don't scroll away, this story will shake your heart. Watch till the end and feel every silent moment of her revenge unfold. Miss Reynolds, the judge said, adjusting his glasses with that same condescending smirk, you've come a long way for something you don't understand. My father's lawyer grinned. My father didn't even look at me. I folded my hands on the table, letting the silence stretch just long enough for him to wonder what I might say. Then I smiled, small, quiet, deliberate. I understand more than you think, Your Honor. He blinked, caught off guard. It was the first of many small victories I'd planned. The papers on the desk in front of me weren't just documents. They were the ghosts of everything my father had stolen. My mother's savings, her home, her name. I could still smell her perfume on the blue folder she'd once kept her will in. The night she died, he'd taken that folder from her bedside drawer and replaced it with another. Same color, different truth. I was the only one who noticed. He'd been careful all his life. Meticulous. Calculating. But not careful enough. As his lawyer droned on about financial mismanagement and unfit heirs, my father leaned toward the judge and whispered something that made them both laugh. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. I'd heard that laugh before at my mother's funeral when the insurance check cleared. They thought they were clever men in control of a foolish woman. What they didn't know was that every mistake I'd made up to this point, every delayed filing, every document I'd forgotten to sign, was part of a much larger design. When the judge finally asked if I had anything to add, I stood. My knees trembled, not from fear but from holding back years of rage. Yes, Your Honor, I said softly, I'd like to make one clarification. He sighed, the way men sigh when they believe the conversation's already over. Go ahead. My father's lawyer snickered. Make it brief. I nodded. I will. Then I looked at my father, really looked at him. His tie was perfectly straight, his shoes polished enough to catch the light. He looked like the man who'd built an empire. But I knew what it was built on. Lies, signatures that weren't his, names that didn't belong to him. I just want to remind the court, I said, that truth leaves paper trails. My father's smile faltered, barely visible but enough to tell me I'd hit something. He turned his head slightly, like he wasn't sure if he'd heard me right. The judge frowned. Excuse me. Paper trails, I repeated. They're very patient things. For a moment the room was quiet. Only the ticking clock above the jury box filled the space. Then my father's lawyer laughed again, too loud, too eager. Your Honor, this is irrelevant. She's clearly emotional. Emotional. I tilted my head. Is that what you call honesty now? My father finally looked at me, his eyes narrowing in that way that used to make me small when I was a child. Not this time. This time I met his stare and held it until he looked away first. The clerk shifted in her chair. The air felt heavier. Someone coughed near the back. Even the old radiator hissed like it knew something was about to change. That's when I noticed the man in the second row, a stranger in a brown coat taking notes quietly. He didn't belong to either side, and yet he was watching every word. I didn't recognize him then, but I would later. For now he was just another piece of the game. Miss Reynolds, the judge interrupted, irritation creeping into his voice. If you have evidence, present it. If not, stop wasting the court's time. I smiled politely. Not yet, Your Honor. He raised a brow. Not yet. I'm still collecting, I said simply. You see, patience isn't a weakness. It's a strategy. My father exhaled sharply through his nose, the same sound he made whenever he realized he wasn't in control. Judge, this is nonsense. She's trying to stall. I turned toward him, my voice calm. No, I'm trying to give you time to remember what you've forgotten. He froze. Just slightly. A single second of hesitation, but I saw it. So did the judge. Forgotten? The judge asked, feigning disinterest. I shrugged lightly. You'd be surprised what slips through the cracks when men think no one's watching. The lawyer rolled his eyes. Your Honor, she's making accusations without proof. Proof is patient too, I said quietly. A murmur rippled through the back of the courtroom. The stranger in the brown coat stopped writing for a moment, looking up. My father shifted his weight, his confidence slowly melting into discomfort. That was when I noticed his hands, how tightly he clenched them, how his knuckles whitened. My father, the man who never flinched, was finally losing control. I didn't need to raise my voice. The silence was enough to make them all listen. The judge leaned forward. Miss Reynolds, I'll remind you, this court deals in facts, not feelings. Then you'll like what's coming next, I said softly. He didn't understand what I meant, not yet. But the stranger in the brown coat did. His pen started moving again. He wasn't there for me or my father, he was there for something bigger. I could feel it. As the session dragged on, I stayed quiet, taking notes while they spoke. Every number, every statement, every smug word from my father's mouth. I wrote them all down. I wanted him to see me writing, to remember that for once in his life someone was recording him. When recess was called, my father approached me in the hallway. His cologne filled the space before his voice did. You're embarrassing yourself, he said under his breath. I looked up at him, calm. You taught me well. He blinked. Excuse me. Paper trails, I repeated. They're very patient things. For a moment the room was quiet. Only the ticking clock above the jury box filled the space. Then my father's lawyer laughed again, too loud, too eager. Your Honor, this is irrelevant. She's clearly emotional. Emotional. I tilted my head. Is that what you call honesty now? My father finally looked at me, his eyes narrowing in that way that used to make me small when I was a child. Not this time. This time I met his stare and held it until he looked away first. The clerk shifted in her chair. The air felt heavier. Someone coughed near the back. Even the old radiator hissed like it knew something was about to change. That's when I noticed the man in the second row, a stranger in a brown coat taking notes quietly. He didn't belong to either side, and yet he was watching every word. I didn't recognize him then, but I would later. For now he was just another piece of the game. Miss Reynolds, the judge interrupted, irritation creeping into his voice. If you have evidence, present it. If not, stop wasting the court's time. I smiled politely. Not yet, Your Honor. He raised a brow. Not yet. I'm still collecting, I said simply. You see, patience isn't a weakness. It's a strategy. My father exhaled sharply through his nose, the same sound he made whenever he realized he wasn't in control. Judge, this is nonsense. She's trying to stall. I turned toward him, my voice calm. No, I'm trying to give you time to remember what you've forgotten. He froze. Just slightly. A single second of hesitation, but I saw it. So did the judge. Forgotten? The judge asked, feigning disinterest. I shrugged lightly. You'd be surprised what slips through the cracks when men think no one's watching. The lawyer rolled his eyes. Your Honor, she's making accusations without proof. Proof is patient too, I said quietly. A murmur rippled through the back of the courtroom. The stranger in the brown coat stopped writing for a moment, looking up. My father shifted his weight, his confidence slowly melting into discomfort. That was when I noticed his hands, how tightly he clenched them, how his knuckles whitened. My father, the man who never flinched, was finally losing control. I didn't need to raise my voice. The silence was enough to make them all listen. The judge leaned forward. Miss Reynolds, I'll remind you, this court deals in facts, not feelings. Then you'll like what's coming next, I said softly. He didn't understand what I meant, not yet. But the stranger in the brown coat did. His pen started moving again. He wasn't there for me or my father, he was there for something bigger. I could feel it. As the session dragged on, I stayed quiet, taking notes while they spoke. Every number, every statement, every smug word from my father's mouth. I wrote them all down. I wanted him to see me writing, to remember that for once in his life someone was recording him. When recess was called, my father approached me in the hallway. His cologne filled the space before his voice did. You're embarrassing yourself, he said under his breath. I looked up at him, calm. You taught me well. He blinked. Excuse me. How to make people believe one thing while you're doing another, I said. You were always the best at that. His jaw tightened. This isn't a game, Claire. It was never a game, I replied. But you played it like one. Then I turned away before he could answer. When we reconvened, the atmosphere had shifted. Even the judge seemed uneasy. He avoided meeting my eyes now, focusing instead on the clock, on the papers, on anything but me. My father's lawyer stumbled through his next argument, losing his rhythm as he tried to sound confident. I sat back, letting the quiet confidence do its work. I didn't need to win that day. I only needed them to feel that something was coming. And they did. By the end of the hearing, the laughter was gone. My father looked older, his face pale beneath the courtroom lights. The judge cleared his throat, pretending to check his notes. As I gathered my papers, I whispered 2 words, not loud enough for the room to hear, but enough for him. His eyes widened. He mouthed, "What did you say?" I smiled faintly. "You'll see." Outside, the air was colder than before. I could smell rain coming. Reporters stood near the courthouse steps, waiting for something dramatic. But I didn't give them that satisfaction. I walked past them quietly, clutching my blue folder, the same one my mother used to hold. The stranger in the brown coat followed a few steps behind me, stopping at the corner. When I turned to look, he nodded once before walking away. I didn't know his name yet, but I knew what he represented. Validation. Someone had seen what happened inside that room. Someone who wasn't afraid to write it down. When I reached my car, I sat there for a long moment before turning the key. The rain started to fall softly on the windshield, tapping a slow rhythm. My hands shook, not from fear but from the weight of control. For years he made me believe silence was weakness, that obedience was love. But today silence had power. It had presence. And it had witnesses. I looked at the courthouse one last time. Through the rain-blurred glass, I could see him standing in the doorway, motionless, watching. He didn't know it yet, but everything he'd hidden was already unraveling. The laughter, the arrogance, the lies. Soon they'd all be written down. And when the time came, I wouldn't need to shout. All I'd need were 2 words. The rain was still falling when I whispered those 2 words to myself, the ones I knew would one day change everything. They tasted strange in my mouth, quiet, almost weightless, but their echo followed me all the way home. That night I couldn't sleep. The sound of rain on the roof mixed with the memory of their laughter. Every drop felt like a question hitting glass. When? When will you strike? I stared at the folder on my table, its blue cover slightly worn at the corners. My mother's handwriting still lingered inside the spine. It reminded me of her steadiness and of everything he had taken. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger had limits. What I felt now was colder, cleaner. A kind of clarity only silence could bring. Morning came gray again, as if even the sky refused to move on. I made coffee, the old kind from a tin, and watched it steam while the news droned faintly in the background. There it was. My father's company mentioned briefly, his photo flashing across the screen with the word philanthropist beneath it. I almost laughed. People adored him. The charming businessman who donated to hospitals, who shook hands with city officials, who smiled in every picture. No one saw the man who'd locked my mother out of her own accounts the week before she died. The world worshipped his mask. But I had seen his ledger. I'd seen what he paid to keep that mask clean. I wrote a note on the edge of a grocery list. Call the bank. Then another. Ask about transaction records prior to 2017. I folded it under the folder's clasp, beside the envelope marked with a single word, evidence. By noon, I was standing in line at the courthouse records office. The air smelled like dust and toner. A woman behind the counter chewed gum while stamping forms, her nails bright red against the beige folders. Name? She asked without looking up. Reynolds. Claire Reynolds. She paused, then frowned at the screen. You related to Thomas Reynolds? I smiled faintly. Unfortunately. Her eyes softened. I've heard that name a few times this month. You might want to check Section D. They've been reorganizing his files. I thanked her and followed the hallway. Flickering lights, uneven tiles, the sound of distant printers humming like restless bees. Section D was colder, quieter. There was only one clerk there, an older man with wire glasses and kind eyes. He looked like the sort of person who'd seen more lies written on paper than most people see in a lifetime. I'm looking for transfer records, I said, keeping my tone polite but steady. He studied me for a moment. Family dispute? Something like that. He nodded, disappearing into the back room. When he returned, he placed 2 dusty boxes on the counter. Start here. But you didn't get these from me. I smiled. You have my silence. He smiled back, a quiet understanding between two people who'd both been burned before. For the next 3 hours I sat on the floor surrounded by folders. The papers smelled of age, ink, sweat, and time. I traced each signature, each transaction until I found the first thread. Small transfers, regular, hidden between legitimate donations. A pattern. My father's company had funneled money into a consultancy firm that didn't exist. And the judge's name appeared 3 times in the correspondence list. I stopped breathing for a second. There it was, the connection I'd suspected but never proved. When I looked up, the clerk was watching me quietly from his desk. "Find what you needed?" he asked. "Not yet," I said, sliding the paper into my folder. "But I'm getting closer." He nodded, almost proud. "You've got the look of someone who's waited a long time for justice." "Too long," I whispered. On my way out, I saw the stranger from the courtroom, the man in the brown coat. He was standing by the vending machine, feeding in coins one by one. When our eyes met, he nodded again. "You following me?" I asked lightly. He smiled, pulling a press badge from his pocket. "Just doing my job. You made quite an impression yesterday." "Journalist." "Freelance. I cover corruption cases." "You caught my attention." "I'm not giving interviews," I said. "Good," he replied. "That makes you smarter than most people in that building." He glanced at the blue folder in my hands, then lowered his voice. "Whatever you have in there, keep it safe. There are people who don't like things coming to light." "Like who?" "Let's just say your father has friends who owe him favors. Big ones." I didn't respond. He didn't need me to. We both understood the danger that came with truth. Before leaving, he handed me his card. "If you ever decide to tell your story, call me first." I slipped it into my coat pocket beside my mother's old locket. That night, I sat by the window again, folder open, notes spread out across the table. I wrote timelines, names, numbers. Every fact felt like a brick in the wall I was building. Quiet, solid, deliberate. But as the hours passed, unease crept in. For every document I found, there were 2 more missing. Someone was scrubbing the records, erasing traces. By midnight, I realized something chilling. The gaps weren't random. They were targeted. The missing files were the same ones tied to my mother's hospital bills, her trust fund, and the house deed. It wasn't just greed. It was destruction. He'd wanted her legacy gone, erased like she'd never existed. That's when I decided silence wouldn't just be my shield, it would be my trap. The next morning, I visited an old friend, Martha, a retired accountant who used to work for my father's firm before he downsized her department. She lived in a small house near the harbor, surrounded by cats and stacks of old ledgers. When she saw me at the door, her face softened. "Claire, it's been years." "I know," I said. "I need your help." She hesitated. "If this is about your father." "It is. And you're the only one who can confirm what I found." For a moment she looked torn. Then she sighed and motioned me in. "You always were like your mother. Come in before someone sees you." Inside, the air smelled like lemon polish and old paper. I handed her a copy of the transaction sheet. She read it twice before setting it down. "I remember these," she said quietly. "We were told to process them as charity expenses." "For who?" She looked away. "For the judge's re-election campaign." But no one was supposed to know. The silence that followed felt heavier than truth itself. I leaned forward. "Martha, will you testify if I need you?" Her eyes filled with something between fear and relief. "If you promise he'll never hurt anyone again." I nodded. "I promise." As I drove home, the wind picked up. Clouds rolled across the sky like bruises. Halfway down the road, I noticed a black car in my rearview mirror. Close, too close. It followed every turn. I pulled into a grocery store lot and waited. The car slowed, then passed, disappearing into traffic. But the message was clear. Someone was watching. I took a deep breath, gripping the steering wheel. I couldn't stop now. Fear was just another form of control, and I'd lived under that long enough. When I got home, I placed Martha's statement inside the folder. Beneath it, I added a single note: "He knows I know." 2 days later, I returned to the courthouse for a procedural hearing. The same judge presided, but his confidence had faded. He cleared his throat too often, shuffled papers that didn't need shuffling. My father sat beside his lawyer, whispering urgently. His eyes kept flicking toward me. "Miss Reynolds," the judge began, Have you obtained the documents you mentioned? I looked at him, calm and steady. Not all of them yet, but enough to understand the pattern. Pattern, he repeated, voice cracking slightly. Yes. It's amazing what you find when you follow numbers instead of words. The lawyer jumped in, defensive. Your Honor, this is harassment. Is it? I interrupted softly. Because these numbers don't lie. People do. A low murmur spread through the courtroom. The same stranger from before was there again, pen in hand, writing everything down. My father's face tightened. You don't know what you're talking about. Oh, I do, I said, lowering my voice. And so does your judge. The room went utterly still. For a full 5 seconds no one moved, no one spoke. Even the ceiling fan stopped creaking. Then the judge slammed his gavel, voice trembling. Court adjourned. As I walked out I could feel every eye on my back. Some with pity, others with fear. But one thing was certain. The silence I'd created wasn't weakness anymore. It was power. In that silence they heard everything they'd tried to hide. Outside, the stranger caught up with me again. You just cracked something bigger than you realize, he said. I know, I replied, clutching my folder. And they do too. He glanced toward the courthouse doors where my father and the judge stood whispering, their faces pale and tense. They're not laughing anymore, he said. No, I said quietly. They're listening. That night I placed every document into a locked drawer. My hands shook, not from fear, but from the awareness that the ground beneath them was finally shifting. The silence I'd built had done its work. It had traveled through walls, across papers, through whispers. It had reached them. And for the first time in my life, my father, the man who once controlled every sound in my world, was the one surrounded by quiet. The kind of quiet that screams truth. That night the quiet felt different. It wasn't the kind that presses on your chest. It was the kind that listens back. The kind that breathes. The kind that waits. I sat by the same window, the courthouse folder now locked away, my mother's locket resting against my skin. Outside, the streetlight buzzed and flickered, painting faint golden lines across the wall. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked once, then stopped as if the whole neighborhood had decided to keep still for me. That silence, my silence, was no longer empty. It was loaded. When I was a little girl, I used to hide behind the curtains while my parents argued. My mother spoke softly, trying to reason. My father spoke in thunder. He always won. After she'd leave the room, he'd glance at me and say, "That's how weak people lose, Claire. They talk too much." I grew up believing words were weapons that backfired. But that night, staring into the quiet, I realized he was half right. People who talk too soon lose. People who wait, listen, and strike at the right time, they win. So I started listening again. Not to him, but to everything else. To the hum between people's lies, to the gaps between words. That's how I began learning the rhythm of power. The next morning I went back to work. My job at the library had always been my sanctuary, rows of order in a world full of chaos. I loved the smell of old paper, the way dust floated in sunlight like small secrets refusing to settle. But even there I couldn't escape whispers. 2 women at the counter lowered their voices when I passed. "Did you see the paper?" one said. Her father's company might be in trouble. I kept walking. I didn't need their sympathy. It was the same kind of pity they used to give my mother when she stayed silent at dinner parties. At my desk, I sorted returned books, alphabetizing them by author. The motion steadied me. Filing words someone else had written reminded me that I was rewriting my own. When I reached the R section, I found one book out of place, The Art of War. Someone had slipped a folded note inside the front cover. My pulse quickened. I opened it carefully. One line, handwritten. "They're erasing files. Act before Friday." No name. No signature. Just that message. The paper smelled faintly of coffee. And the handwriting, sharp, quick, deliberate, looked familiar. The journalist. I left early, telling my supervisor I wasn't feeling well. By the time I reached home, the air had changed. The phone was ringing, unknown number. "Ms. Reynolds." The voice was low, male, cautious. "You don't know me, but I work at Citibank's archive department. I saw your request for the 2017 transfers. They've been flagged for deletion." My stomach tightened. "By who?" Pause. "Someone higher up. I thought you should know before they disappear for good." He hung up before I could ask his name. I stood there for a moment, the dial tone humming in my ear, my heart racing in slow, heavy beats. That's when I knew silence could only protect me if I moved within it. Thursday evening I went to the bank. The lobby smelled like cold marble and printer ink. People came and went, briefcases clutched like shields. I waited in line, hands tucked inside my coat pockets. When it was my turn, I asked to see the branch manager. He looked irritated when he stepped out. A tall man with a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Miss Reynolds, correct? What can I do for you?" "I need a copy of all transfer activity from my late mother's account. I already filed a request." He hesitated. "Those records are sealed under corporate instruction." "By whose instruction?" "Internal compliance." I leaned closer, my voice calm. "Funny. Because I already spoke with someone from your compliance department." He said something different. He blinked just once, but I saw it. The small twitch of someone caught off guard. "I'll see what I can do," he said, then vanished into the back office. 5 minutes later, a young teller slipped me an envelope under the counter. "He said to give you this. You didn't get it from us." Inside were 2 pages. The first, a list of transfers. The second, a memo, signed by my father's lawyer, requesting permanent deletion of non-essential financial data. I folded the papers and whispered under my breath, "Thank you, silence." On my way out, I saw him again. The journalist, leaning against a pillar, pretending to read a newspaper. "You like following me, don't you?" I said quietly. He smiled. "I like watching liars panic." "Then keep watching. They're about to." He nodded approvingly. "You learn fast." I thought about that line for a long time after. Maybe that's what made me different from my father. I didn't need to shout, threaten, or charm. I learned fast. The next few days blurred into a quiet storm. I worked, I gathered, I watched. I started noticing things I'd missed before. People hesitating when they spoke my father's name, whispers in corridors, messages that stopped mid-sentence. The silence around him was spreading like smoke. One night Martha called me. "I've been thinking," she said. "You'll need proof that can't be denied." "I might have something, an old USB from when I worked at his firm." "What's on it?" "I'm not sure, but I remember saving internal audits. They vanished later." "Can I come by tomorrow?" "Yes, but be careful. I think someone's been calling my house asking questions." My throat tightened. "Did you tell them anything?" She laughed softly. "Child, I've been ignored by powerful men for 40 years. I know how to keep quiet." The next day I took the long way to her house, watching mirrors, counting turns. Old habits, new reasons. When I arrived, she was waiting at the window, curtains drawn halfway. She let me in quickly, locking the door behind us. "Here," she said, handing me the small flash drive. "I found it in my sewing kit. Guess I trusted needles more than men." I smiled. "You always did." Her hand trembled slightly as she poured tea. "Claire, what happens after this?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But I won't stop until they can't bury her name again." She reached across the table, covering my hand. "Then you're already stronger than he'll ever be." That night I plugged the drive into my laptop. The screen flickered once, then opened a folder titled, "Internal Review, Confidential." Inside were hundreds of PDFs. I clicked through them, forged donations, bribes masked as grants, property transfers under false charities. But one file stopped me cold. It wasn't financial. It was personal. Medical expense reimbursement. Reynolds E. My mother. The document showed hospital payments rejected under unauthorized access. My father had denied coverage for her final treatments. On paper, she had no valid claim because he'd removed her name from the trust. The cursor hovered over the signature line. His. My hands shook. He hadn't just stolen from her. He'd watched her suffer, knowing he'd already cut her off. I closed the laptop and sat still for a long time, breathing through the ache in my chest. I'd spent my whole life trying not to become like him, but in that moment I understood something painful. Sometimes to end a monster you have to learn his language. The next morning I called the journalist. "Meet me at the old pier," I said. He arrived before I did, leaning on the railing, coffee in hand. The water was gray, restless, slapping against the posts like it was impatient for the truth to surface. "I have proof," I told him. He raised an eyebrow. "You sure you want to hand it over?" I'm not handing it over, I said. I'm letting it breathe. He studied me for a long moment, then smiled. You really are your mother's daughter. That made me pause. How do you know about her? I did my homework, he said. Everyone remembers the man who built the empire. No one remembers the woman who paid for it. For the first time I didn't flinch hearing it. I just nodded. Then it's time they did. When I got home I placed copies of every document in 3 different envelopes. One went to Martha. One to the journalist. One stayed with me. I labeled them the same way my mother labeled her recipes. Neat, careful handwriting underlined twice. On the back of mine I wrote, "If anything happens to me, this speaks." I sealed it and slid it behind a loose board under the floor lamp. Then I sat down, exhaled, and looked around the small living room, the same one my father once said was too humble for his daughter. He'd never understand that I didn't want luxury. I wanted justice that didn't need applause. The kind that arrived quietly. That night I watched the news again. My father's company appeared in another segment, this time not for charity, but for pending inquiries regarding financial inconsistencies. It was small, just a 2-minute story, but it was enough. I smiled. The silence had started speaking on its own. My phone buzzed. A text from the journalist. They're starting to panic. Be ready. I typed back, I've been ready my whole life. As I turned off the light, the room filled with that familiar stillness. But it wasn't loneliness anymore. It was strategy, strength, control. That was how I learned to fight quietly, not with noise, not with fury, but with patience sharp enough to cut steel. And I knew that soon, very soon, my silence would do what his power never could. Make him answer. I had spent a lifetime waiting to be heard. Now I didn't have to speak. My silence did it for me. The next morning I woke before dawn. The sky outside was still the color of pewter, heavy with the promise of rain. My coffee tasted metallic, sharp. I turned on the television out of habit, and there it was. A headline crawling across the bottom of the screen. Local business magnate under financial investigation. No name yet. No photo. But I knew. I could feel it in my bones. The first crack in his empire had formed. By noon, phones were ringing nonstop. Reporters. Former employees. Distant relatives pretending to check on me. I didn't answer a single call. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table listening to the house settle. Every creak in the floor felt like the world finally adjusting itself, piece by piece after years of imbalance. At 3 p.m. Martha called. "Claire," she whispered, "they came by my house. 2 men in suits. Said they were auditors." My chest tightened. "What did you tell them?" "Nothing. I gave them cookies and said I didn't know a thing." She laughed, but there was fear beneath it. "Good," I said. "Keep that story. If they come again, tell them I moved out of town." "Are they dangerous?" "Only when they're desperate," I said softly. "And they're getting there." That evening I drove to the pier. The same one where I'd met the journalist. The wind cut colder this time, carrying the sharp scent of salt and rust. He was waiting, hands in his coat pockets, expression serious. "They're falling apart," he said as soon as I approached. "The financial board just froze your father's assets." The judge's name appeared in one of the leaked documents. "It's spreading." I stared out at the water. "So it begins." He glanced at me. "You don't look relieved." "I'm not," I said. "Not yet." He studied me for a long moment. "You know, most people would be celebrating. Most people didn't grow up watching men like them destroy lives while smiling for cameras." He nodded, understanding without prying. Then he pulled a small flash drive from his pocket. "This is for you. Copies of everything that's gone public, and a few files that haven't." I took it carefully. "Why give me this?" "Because," he said, "you started it. And you should see how it ends." The following morning I walked into the courthouse again. The same doors that once swallowed me whole now opened like something waiting to be conquered. Inside, the atmosphere had shifted. Gone were the smug smiles, the casual greetings. People spoke in hushed tones, glancing over shoulders. I saw him, my father, at the far end of the hall, arguing with his lawyer. His hair looked thinner, his posture heavier. He still wore the same polished shoes, but they squeaked slightly with every step, tiny betrayals of control slipping away. When his eyes met mine, the air between us seemed to freeze. He walked over, voice low and clipped. Are you proud of yourself? No, I said. But I'm patient. He exhaled sharply. You think this makes you powerful? No, I said. It makes me free. He shook his head. You've embarrassed this family. Then we finally have something in common, I replied. His jaw tightened, but he didn't answer. Behind him, a man in a gray suit approached, an investigator, judging by the badge clipped to his belt. He handed my father a letter. Mr. Reynolds, you're required to surrender all business records pending review. My father's face drained of color. This is a mistake. The investigator's voice was calm. Then you'll have a chance to prove it. For once my father had no words. Later that day I sat through the preliminary hearing. The judge presiding was not the same one. That one had quietly taken a leave of absence for health reasons. The irony was delicious. As the new judge reviewed the evidence, I kept my eyes fixed on the table, pretending not to notice the way the courtroom buzzed around us. Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras clicked. My father's lawyer stumbled through half-formed defenses. Your Honor, he said nervously, my client has been a respected member of this community for over 30 years. The judge interrupted him. Then he'll understand the importance of accountability. My father's hand twitched beside his papers. It wasn't anger I saw in him anymore. It was fear. The kind of fear that comes when a man realizes the mirror is finally honest. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply sat there steady the way my mother used to when storms rattled the windows. After the session ended, I stepped outside into the courtyard. Reporters crowded near the steps, shouting questions. I kept walking head high, ignoring the chaos. Then, out of the noise, I heard one question that made me stop. Do you think justice will be served, Ms. Reynolds? I turned slowly toward the voice. It was the journalist. His tone wasn't hungry for headlines. It was curious, human. Justice isn't served, I said. It's reclaimed. He wrote that down. By Friday, the headlines carried names. Thomas Reynolds and Judge Harold Clay under investigation for corruption and fraud. It felt surreal reading it in black and white. For years I had been the invisible daughter. Now every newsstand bore our family name, and for once, it wasn't attached to pride. It was attached to truth. Martha called again that afternoon. I saw the paper, she said, her voice shaking with excitement. You did it. No, I said gently. We did it. She laughed through tears. Your mother would be smiling right now. I hope so, I whispered. But she'd probably tell me to keep my guard up. She always did, Martha said. That night, sleep wouldn't come. I lay awake, listening to the wind scrape against the shutters. Part of me felt lighter, but another part, the part that had waited for this moment, felt strangely hollow. Was this what victory felt like? Quiet, heavy, almost sad? I sat up, turned on the lamp, and opened the flash drive the journalist had given me. Inside were scanned reports, emails, bank transfers, and one audio file. I pressed play. It was the judge's voice. Nervous, whispering into the phone. She knows Tom. He's got everything. If this goes public, we're finished. Then my father's voice, colder than I remembered. Keep her quiet. I don't care how. My heart hammered. I stopped the recording. The memory of the black car following me flashed through my mind. They had tried once already. Maybe more than once. But they had failed. The next morning I made copies of the file and sent one to the investigative board. The other I gave to the journalist. If anything happens to me, I said, you know what to do. He nodded. You're not going anywhere. Still, as I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that danger was circling. Not loud or obvious, but quiet, like a storm preparing its path. 2 weeks passed. The board froze all assets belonging to both men. Their homes were raided. Documents seized. The judge's resignation letter made front-page news. I didn't attend the press conferences. I didn't need to. Instead, I visited my mother's grave. A small headstone beneath a birch tree, the marble smooth from years of wind. I knelt and brushed off the leaves. It's done, I whispered. They finally see them for who they are. A robin landed on the branch above me, tilting its head. The sky was clear for the first time in weeks. You taught me to be kind, I said. But I had to learn how to be strong. For a moment I could almost hear her voice, not words, just warmth. The kind that says I understand. That afternoon a letter arrived at my doorstep. No return address. Inside, a single sheet of paper. You've won the battle, Claire. But wars don't end clean. My pulse quickened. There was no signature, but I recognized the typewriter font. My father's lawyer. A warning. Or maybe a confession. I folded it carefully and set it aside. The war might not be over, but the ground beneath them was gone. 3 days later, the news announced the final blow. The judge had been indicted for bribery and obstruction of justice. My father was facing charges for embezzlement and forgery. 2 men who once shared laughter in a courtroom now shared silence in custody. I watched the coverage quietly, the reporter's voice fading behind the images. Flashing lights, handcuffs, lowered heads. It didn't bring joy. It brought stillness. Because revenge isn't loud. It's measured. It's patient. And mine had arrived exactly on time. That night, the journalist called. "They're asking if you'll make a statement," he said. "I've said enough." He paused. "Then what will you do now?" I looked out the window, watching the lights flicker across the empty street. "Rest. For the first time in my life, I'll rest." He chuckled softly. "You've earned it." Maybe I had. But I knew there was still one thing left. One quiet act that would finish what I'd started. I hung up, walked to my study, and unlocked the drawer where my mother's folder rested. Inside were the original deeds, the ones he had tried to erase. Her signature steady and proud. I ran my fingers over her name. "You're home again," I whispered. By dawn I felt it, the world had shifted. 2 men had fallen and I didn't have to lift a single stone. All I'd done was wait, listen, and trust the quiet to do the rest. But deep down I knew silence never stays still forever. It echoes. It carries unfinished truths. And one of them was still waiting for me. It was Sunday morning. Soft light spilling through thin curtains, the kind of light that makes everything look almost peaceful. I sat by the window with my coffee growing cold beside me. The world outside was quiet again. Birds on the fence, a child's laughter from the next street over, the hum of a lawnmower in the distance. Ordinary sounds. Safe sounds. But deep down I knew my story hadn't quite exhaled yet. There was still one thread, one unanswered question that tugged at the edges of my calm. The man who taught me that silence was weakness. The man who'd built his empire on other people's backs and now sat in the ruins of his own creation. My father. I hadn't seen him since the indictment. But this morning an envelope lay at my doorstep, unmarked and folded once neatly. Inside, a single note, written in his familiar, forceful handwriting. "You got what you wanted. I have nothing left. Come see what you've done." No signature. No address. But I didn't need one. I knew exactly where he'd be. The old house. The one he'd once called our foundation. The house my mother had painted herself, the house I'd been locked out of when she died. I drove there slowly, the sky shifting from gray to gold as I approached the long driveway. The iron gates stood open, something they hadn't been for years. Grass grew high along the fence. The rose bushes my mother had planted had turned wild, untamed, their thorns curling across the stone path like nature reclaiming what had been stolen. For a moment I stood there, the keys heavy in my hand. The door was ajar, creaking softly with the wind. I stepped inside. Dust floated through sunlight beams, making the air look heavy. The scent of old wood and forgotten polish lingered. The furniture was covered in sheets, ghostly and still. Then I heard him, coughing from the study. He sat at his desk, smaller somehow, his once commanding posture replaced with a slouch of exhaustion. His hair had gone completely white. Papers littered the desk, court summons, statements, printed articles with his name plastered across headlines. He looked up, his eyes finding mine. For the first time he didn't look angry or proud. He just looked empty. "So," he rasped, "you came." "I did." He nodded, glancing at the papers. "You destroyed everything." "No," I said softly. "You did. I just stopped cleaning up after you." His jaw tightened. "You think this makes you righteous?" "I don't care about righteous," I said. "I care about truth." He scoffed. "Truth doesn't matter. Perception does." "It used to," I said. "Not anymore." He pushed back his chair slightly, rubbing his temple. "They've taken everything. The house, the business, the accounts. Do you even understand what you've done?" I met his gaze evenly. "I ended the cycle." He stared at me, the faintest flicker of something, confusion or maybe regret, crossing his face. "You're your mother's daughter," he muttered. "I am," I said. But she believed silence meant survival. I learned silence can also be strategy. He looked at the wall behind me where an old painting of my mother still hung, her smile caught forever in oil and color. "She would have hated this," he said. "You turning against your own blood." I walked closer, my voice calm. "You taught me that blood means ownership. She taught me it means responsibility. That's the difference between you and her." He chuckled weakly. "You always were sentimental." I placed the folder I'd brought, my mother's original deeds, on the desk between us. "Do you know what sentimental people do when they're pushed too far?" He looked at it but didn't touch it. "They break." I shook my head. "They remember." For a moment neither of us spoke. The clock ticked loudly in the corner, a sound I'd hated as a child because it always meant time running out. Now it just felt like rhythm, steady, fair, unstoppable. "Why did you do it?" I asked finally. "Why take her trust, her savings, her peace?" He stared at the desk, his voice low. "Because she made me feel small." I froze. "She didn't need me," he said, bitterness lacing every word. "She built everything we had. The business, the house, even the family's reputation. And people looked at me like I was standing in her shadow. I couldn't bear it." "So you punished her for being better than you?" He looked up, his eyes suddenly fierce again. I restored balance. "No," I whispered. "You erased love and called it balance." He looked away. "It's all gone now. Are you happy?" I took a step back, my throat tight. "No," I said. "But I'm free." He turned toward the window. The morning light touched his face, showing deep lines I'd never noticed before. "Freedom is overrated," he said. "It's lonely." "Maybe," I said. "But at least it's honest." He gave a bitter smile. "You sound just like her when she left my office that last day." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, then sighed. "She came to confront me. She'd found out about the transfers. Said she'd go to the police. I told her if she did I'd cut her off completely. She walked away without another word. And 2 weeks later." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. For a long moment we sat in silence. Then I said quietly, "She didn't die from illness alone. You broke her spirit first." His shoulders slumped. "You think I don't know that?" "Knowing isn't the same as feeling," I said. "You didn't feel anything, not until the world stopped clapping for you." He pressed his hands to his face, trembling. "So what now, Claire? You've won. What happens to me?" I studied him, the man who once seemed larger than life now reduced to regret and ruin. "You live," I said simply. "That's the punishment." I turned to leave. As I reached the door, his voice stopped me. "You think silence is freedom," he said. "But it's a cage too. One day you'll realize that." I looked back at him. "Maybe. But it's a cage I built myself, not one you locked me in." He didn't answer. He just stared at the folder on his desk, the weight of it anchoring him to everything he'd lost. I stepped outside. The wind met me with a sharp chill, but it felt clean, earned. The sky stretched open, endless and pale, and for the first time I could breathe without hesitation. When I reached the end of the driveway, a car pulled up beside me. It was the journalist. "I had a feeling I'd find you here," he said, stepping out. I smiled faintly. "You always seem to." "Are you all right?" he asked. "I am," I said. "It's over." He looked toward the house. "He's finished." "Yes," I said softly. "But he still has to live with himself. That's worse than any sentence." He nodded, understanding. "What will you do now?" I looked at the horizon, the road ahead clear and long. "Start again. Maybe somewhere quiet." He smiled. "You mean quieter than this?" I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in years. "No," I said. "The right kind of quiet." That evening I went home and unlocked my mother's folder one last time. Inside I placed a letter addressed to no one in particular. Just the words. "To whoever finds this, silence is not weakness. It's the space where strength grows." I sealed it, tucked it beside the folder, and slid both into a wooden box under my bed. As I closed the lid, I felt something shift inside me. Not relief, not triumph, but peace. Later that night, I sat outside beneath the porch light, watching the sky change colors. The world was still humming with quiet life, Crickets, rustling trees, the faint hum of a car in the distance. For years I had mistaken quiet for loneliness. But now it sounded like freedom, like breathing after being underwater too long. I took a slow breath and looked at the stars. "We did it, Mom," I whispered. "He can't touch us anymore." Somewhere in the night, the wind carried the faint scent of roses, the wild ones from the old house, still blooming through broken fences. And I smiled because I knew she was free too. The next morning I packed a small suitcase. No destination planned, no map in hand. Just a new beginning. Before locking the door, I looked back at the empty living room. The chair, the lamp, the faint echo of the life that had shaped me. Then I whispered, "Thank you, silence." Because silence had given me everything. The truth, the patience, the time to build myself back piece by piece. It had taught me how to survive men who thought power meant noise. Now it was teaching me how to live. As the sun rose behind me, I drove down the open road. No more fear, no more shadows. Just the hum of the engine and the sound of wind against glass. For the first time I didn't look back. Because some revenges aren't about destruction. They're about reclamation. And mine ended not with words, but with the kind of silence that finally, truly belonged to me. That silence, that freedom, was the loudest victory of all. If her quiet strength moved you, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe for more emotional, revenge-filled stories every week.